Welcome to Woman on It Hack the Future. My name is Beata Young, and today's PhD Positivity Hack delivered will be by our guest Annie Goodrow. Topic Perimenopause and you reclaim your energy and well being. Episode 153 starts here. Driven by her passion for women's health, she's here to guide you through this transformative phase. Annie, where in the world are you joining us from today?
Well, I'm joining you from Toronto, Canada.
Fantastic. Welcome to TCI. We are joining from Grand Turk, a small country, small island in the Mediterranean. However, the problem of menopause well-being is a global problem. Women face symptoms of menopause and midlife health issues on a daily basis. So, Annie, you've described perimenopause as a transformative phase. Can you unpack that for us? What are some of the key changes women can expect, both physically and emotionally? And why is it so important that we understand them?
Ooh, big question. And I'm so glad that you're asking that because perimenopause is a phase of life on itself. First of all, we are not educated about this phase of life. So often we arrive here and having no idea of what to expect. In fact, when women come into my practice, what I experience most of the time is them saying, "But Annie, I'm too young for this. I never thought that this could happen to me this young, if you want." So let's talk a little bit about what to expect and what we can do about it. Perimenopause is the phase where estrogen levels are fluctuating and slowly decreasing, leading us to the final point of menopause. That phase can last up to 7 to 10 years. That's right, 7 to 10 years. So, if you think about the average woman, I know in North America, average woman will go through menopause 51 to 52 years old. You could be, technically speaking, in perimenopause in your late 30s. Absolutely not a surprise. Now, what I want women to know is that this is not just a reproductive and sex hormone that decreases and that no longer allows us to, bear children. The fluctuation and eventual slow decrease of estrogen has a total impact on women's bodies because we have what we call estrogen receptors, little places all throughout the body that receives and benefits the wonderful work that estrogen does on our body. This is where it gets really interesting, is that we have recognized by the Menopause Society over 34 symptoms. That's right, 34 symptoms that are associated with perimenopause. So this is why it gets very confusing. It also explains why it is so difficult when we are in our doctor's office to get answers, because it seems on the surface so unrelated to perimenopause. But what I am talking about here are, for example, depression, anxiety, right? Heart palpitations, something called frozen shoulder. You could also be experiencing acid reflux now, joint pain, right? In addition to the classic symptoms, hot flashes and night sweats, brain fog, moodiness, right? So, and these are only a few, of course. So you can see why it is such a confusing journey for women. The good news is that there are a lot of things that we can do as women to navigate this stage wherever it lasts, right? For some women, it will be short, for some women, longer. It's really important to also share that every single woman is going to experience this journey differently. So, What worked for my friend, my sister, my neighbor, my colleague might not work for me because my symptoms will be very different from them. And that has to do with a lot of factors, and a lot of them that we honestly don't know from a scientific standpoint. Menopause research is so behind. So, half of the population are females. We are all going to go through menopause. It is not a disease, it is a journey, just like puberty was a normal stage of life. This is another one, significant one for women. But we'll talk next about what are the things that we can do to support ourselves through perimenopause.
Why is there so little content or so little awareness around perimenopause or menopause? Because after all, everybody, like half of the population, is going to be affected by it.
Yes, it comes from an old stigma that we have from menopause. It used to be shrouded in shame. And, if you think about it, every single natural phenomenon that happens to women, technically speaking, not that long ago, were not talked about. We didn't talk about periods. Right? We didn't talk about periods openly. Now it's a lot more open. But this is, again, a natural phenomenon. It's still in many cultures of the world. We don't talk about this, right? We don't advertise the products that support women, right? It's all hush with vague words and veil concepts, right? That's not helping women. Pregnancy, we did not used to put pregnant women, you know, in advertising, in movies, right? It was like we were a little bit more back of the house. My mother was photographed in a wedding when she was pregnant with me. And she's at the back, the furthest back. The only thing that you see is a little bit of her head. And she said, I was not going to be just seen like this. And that was cultural, right?
Hmm.
Menopause is the same thing. There is this like, we used to call it the change, right? And most conversations were hushed. People would just whisper, right? There was a little bit of reluctance to talk about this. I see this in my practice all the time where women say, my mother did not want to talk about that. She would just say, yep, yep, everything's fine. I never had any issues. So we unfortunately inherit this background. First, second of all, we live in a very misogynist healthcare system for the most part. That's why we are so behind in having the research for women exclusively on women's bodies. Even not that long ago, what we saw is that drugs were not even tested using women because they thought our hormones made things too complicated. So drug companies would only invest with male patients to test their drugs. We are not small men. We are different than men. So that explains a little bit why you're not seeing the open conversations. Now, I will say that I am extremely optimistic because in the last year alone, and I've been at this for a while, but um, over the last little while, we have seen much progress in terms of conversations about perimenopause, menopause, more education coming out. So I'm very optimistic.
Well, but I think it is an important conversation to have because it's not just our body that is affected, it's also our brains that gets affected, especially given the fact that we want to see more women in leadership positions, and that is the critical age that we can make up that step up the ladder. And that's really what may drag us down because before we came to life, I was just sharing my story of my mother, who, as we know, 50 years ago, we didn't have any literature in communist Poland about menopause, let alone, about how to deal with it. And I really was upset because I did not understand what is happening with my mom. We used to have a lot of laughter, and she was very snappy, very all over the place, and it was very difficult time to go through puberty, to deal with mother who was not understanding, who didn't have empathy, and because all she was affected by was this huge swathe of her hormones and hormonal change. So I'm glad that we can talk about it openly. As you mentioned, a period was not the topic, let alone lack of period was not the topic of conversation. So how can women actually enjoy an open conversation, because so many women feel lost and alone when they start experiencing these changes, and they may feel like they are the only ones going through it. What are some of the biggest misconceptions? Let's do a mythbuster here moment with you, Annie.
Yeah, I love these myth busters. The first one is one that I touched on earlier, when we opened up the conversation, which is I'm too young for this, right? That's a myth. We are not too young, and we have to be careful with the notion of average, because averages have a big catch-all, right, of here to here. So really important to understand that we are not too young for this. The second one is it is not just a physical experience, it's a mental, emotional, and physical experience that women will have. The third myth is it's one size fits all. And I think that that's a big one. Menopause is supposed to be this one thing, and that we're all going to be experiencing this thing the same way. And it could not be further from the truth. So, what can women do? What can we do? And this is where I'm excited, because the younger generations are a lot more open about having these kinds of conversations. But what I invite women to do all the time is to simply start talking about it, with our friends, right, in our communities, in the networks that we are part of. Because as soon as somebody starts to talk about this, it's like the floodgates open, and then other women chime in and go, oh my God, me too. I have been feeling fatigued. I have had hot flashes. I thought I was the only one having these brain moments. So this is the first thing that we have to do, is we need to start a talking about it, and b asking questions. Asking questions from our healthcare providers, and honestly many of them are not educated. That's the other tragedy of this conversation, is that most doctors, on average 50% of them in a recent survey about menopause, said that they felt unequipped to support women at menopause. Why? Not because they're not smart, but because they lack the education. Right? They received no formal curriculum about menopause. Even OBGYNs, right, who are supposed to be technically the experts in women's health. I mean, that's another tragedy. And that could be a whole conversation on its own, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But demanding answers is essential.
What are the symptoms that we should be on the lookout and start researching or looking for advice on what to do to mitigate the changes and make that transformation as seamless as possible?
So the first advice is to start paying attention. And sometimes it's simply as simple as noticing the changes that are happening in your body that are not connected to anything else that is going on in your life. For example, I was talking about anxiety, depression, fatigue. If there are no other reasons in your life, everything is the same, your family life, your work situation, your relationship, you haven't changed job, etc., and suddenly you're feeling so depleted, right? Or you're starting to have all kinds of anxiety, but there is no reason for that. There's not more stress than before. It's the regular life, challenges. Write what you are experiencing in a journal. Start documenting what you are experiencing. As some of the symptoms are easy to recognize, some will be a little bit, more nuanced. But start tracking that, because this is wonderful information and critical information when you go see your health provider. Right? That's really important. Or somebody like me who coaches women through menopause, so that we have a really clear understanding of your symptoms. When these symptoms arise and you say, there is no justification for this, everything else is status quo, that's when women should definitely be on the lookout for, maybe this is perimenopause here. Right? And as we said, because it can last up to 7 to 10 years before the end of perimenopause, and I should clarify, the end of perimenopause follows 12 months of consecutive missed periods, no more cycles for 12 consecutive months. That is when perimenopause is officially over and that we are in menopause. So, recognizing the signs at first is really important, because each of these symptoms can be addressed holistically, either individually or um, as a group of symptoms. And we can talk about what women can do, because the good news is there is a lot that we can do. First thing I always talk about, the first asset in our toolbox is actually our own mindset. Right? So, to examine what are our beliefs and values associated with menopause, because the incredible thing is that we've been able to, through science and research and experiments, to determine that the more positive our mindset is about this transition of life, the easier our journey is going to be. And I love that because it speaks to the power of the mind over the body. The second thing is that what we used to do in our 20s and our 30s is no longer going to be serving us. So, to be open-minded about changing some of our habits. And now we'll get more specific into that. But from a lifestyle standpoint, there are what I call three big boulders of menopause. And this applies in perimenopause. First, nutrition. Second, movement. And third, rest and rejuvenation.
Annie, namaste. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and experience with us today.